Hello and welcome to this episode of Thrive by Additive-Free Lifestyle. This is episode 199. We are Tracy and Jo. We're two sisters who are very passionate about asking questions and seeking information about things that make us curious. Thrive is a podcast show that will help you lower your toxic load, guide you through various stages of life, and give you permission to ask questions and seek advice on topics that you may not yet understand. Today's episode, it's brought to you by our Additive-Free Lifestyle app. This can be found on all major app stores, so download it today to create your family meal plan, easy shopping list, and have handy access to an additive information scanner.
Great work, Jo.
Hopefully I can talk better than that in this episode. Oh my gosh, that was hard.
Oh.
I feel like I've broken out into a sweat.
All right, 199. Oh my goodness, nearly episode 200. Who would have thought, hey?
Yeah.
So this episode, we interviewed Dr. Adam Fraser. He's phenomenal. We heard him talk a couple of years ago, and we'd go into this in the podcast show. A couple of years ago at a doTERRA event, it was a business event, leadership event, and his theory of this third space has stuck with us the whole time. And we were talking a little bit before we hit record, and we were laughing about how he made such a really good impression on us. He's like, well, it's better than making a dick impression of, like as in like being a dickhead. So we had a little bit of a laugh about that at the start of the episode. But then I was like to Jo, I really should explain that conversation at the start of the episode. So what we were saying was, better than making a really bad impression, which he did not. He made a really great impression, which is why we got him on the show.
Yeah, the third space has definitely changed both our lives, and I use it every single day, and I could use it more as well, to be honest. But yeah, it's a game changer, and we hope that you love this episode. Let us know, leave a review. Reviews mean so much to us and our business in general, because the more reviews you have on your app store, the higher you'll go in the algorithm. So if you could do that for us, we would very much appreciate it. And share this podcast. I'm actually going to make my husband listen to this, because even though he has got a good 45 minutes up to 2 hours pending traffic drive home, I still feel like that third space could be really beneficial to him as well. And we also talk in this episode about genders and how we are wired a little bit differently. And something I didn't say in the episode is I feel like men are fixers as well. Like I know Shane, when I blurt stuff out to him, he just wants to fix it, where I don't necessarily need him to fix it. I just need him to listen. And so we do talk a little bit about the difference between a woman and a man, or a mum and a dad, in this episode as well.
Which is really interesting. But I would say this episode is really relevant to students as well, studying from home, or students in general. Like they go from class to class to class to class, and they have to transition so many times in a day to be like maths, English, science, especially the older kids doing university or grade 11 and 12. This would be a really good episode for them to listen to, and a concept for them to learn at that younger age, even from like grade 7 onwards. I think could be a really good concept for kids to learn around. But every type of parent out there, stay-at-home mums, stay-at-home dads, part-time workers, all the people, because something we didn't talk about in the episode, but I think it would be really important, like the stay-at-home mum who is transitioning so many times a day that doesn't get acknowledged for any of that. But they're like going from job to job to job within their job, which is obviously being a parent. And then when maybe their partner comes home from work, then transitioning into being that support person for them as well. So I feel like this would be a really good episode. So if you know any stay-at-home mums, that they don't even have to be people that are struggling, just any person. Like this episode is not around if you're struggling in this situation, listen to this. This episode is actually around if you want to show up in a better way for human society in general, then this would be a really good episode to listen to.
100%. Before we get into it, I want to say that we actually teach our toddlers, holy moly, our toddlers how to do this, because we often say to younger kids, okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to be doing this. In 2 minutes, we're going to be doing this. And we give them that transition time. And then somewhere along the lines, we grow up and we forget, actually, we need a third space as well.
And something we also teach our little ones, Jo, is we might say, count to 10, count to 10. And we forget to do that ourselves as well.
Yeah. Okay, let's get stuck into it.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to our show. We have got Dr. Adam Fraser on our show today. And we first heard Adam, I'm going to say, 4, maybe even 5 years ago, at a doTERRA leadership event. And it was one of the most impactful leadership events that I've personally been to. And we were just chatting off air to say that the concept behind Dr. Adam Fraser, Adam, I'll call him Adam, as work has stayed with us for this entire time, like years down the track, and we were kind of laughing. So it was a good impression rather than a dick impression. So, all right.
Not
so,
our
Adam,
words. That was not our words either, by the way.
Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work around this third space. So we've talked to our community a little bit about the third space, but you say it's so much better than we do.
Cool. So you want a bit of background to me?
Little bit of background, please.
So, I'm married. I have 2 daughters, 13 and 10. So that keeps me on my toes. Live in Sydney. In terms of a professional sense, I studied biomedical science at university, then did a PhD. Within there, did a stint at the Institute of Sport working with athletes. But all my research was around sort of performance and how do we do things better and evolve and improve. And the concept that you alluded to is just a piece of research we did, and a concept I came up with more than 10 years ago now, but it's still the most popular thing I've ever done. It's like the Beatles or the Led Zeppelin's White Album that, they can't get away from. And but it's a concept that, as you said, is really sticky. And I still get emails from people who go, I saw you 10 years ago, and I still do that thing every single day. So, the third space is about how do we transition between the different parts of our life.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. When you were saying it at the conference, I was like, why are we not taught this? Like, that makes so much sense. And I personally use it every single day, not to probably the capacity I could be. So I've got room for improvement, but I certainly have this something in my brain that says, hold on, stop, go to the third space, then move on. So what that means for me is, like, I only did it yesterday, and I actually messaged one of our team members and said, I'm just going to get a cacao because I was going from my emails and messages, and that to-do list to another project. And I just couldn't switch. Like, my brain I was procrastinating, and I just, I couldn't get to the next project. And so I was like, right, I need that third space. And I actually messaged her and said, I'm just going to do the third space.
To kind of explain it to people listening to it, what we found in our research is how we transition is really, really important. And when I say transition, I mean, like you described, move from one thing to another. So the kind of first space is what we're doing now. Second space is what we're about to do. And the third space is that transitional gap. And, so this morning, because we've got 2 kids, my wife and I have meetings, like we're trying to launch the space shuttle about like how we fit our life in. So this morning, my wife went to the gym. So I got the girls up, fed them, got them organized, walked them to the bus stop off to school. Then straight after that, I had a salesy call where I was talking to a client about, expanding a project. Then I come in, I'm talking to you. Then after this, I'm having a meeting with my staff. Then I'm going to speak to 300 police officers about how do they, actually, I'm going to talk about the third space, like how do they turn off at the end of the day? So it's just like, too often we we move from one thing to another, but we bring the mood and mindset of that first space into the second one. And that can really hamper our performance, or we just don't show up with the right mindset. So that transitional gap is exactly what you just said, Joanne, around oh, I've got to go into this thing and I'm not quite ready for it. I just need to reset myself. And that's what we're talking about, whether it's I'm going from work to home, whether it's gone from I had a bad meeting with a client to the next one, or whether it's, I've had a frustrating day, but I want to pick up the kids in a good state. So that's what the concept's about.
It's so powerful.
So
My husband's a police officer, and he often will come home and his work, he's still, you can feel it in him, this energy in him. But what he'll do on his way home is he'll often pick up the phone and talk to a good friend or something. Like
normally my husband.
Yeah, normally Joe's husband. So he'll normally pull into the driveway and he's like, blah, 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 blah. So that's his third space, like just decompressing with someone who just getting on the phone. Whereas when you work from home, you don't have that. You leave this desk and I'm straight inside to cooking dinner, to doing something else, to, flick. And it's hard. And I'm not saying it's worse for women as opposed to men or anything, but sometimes that mum brain comes in and you're like, I don't have time to take 10 minutes to just sit, which we do. But this is this mum brain of like, you don't have time. I don't have time. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to rush. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that as well, because
Totally.
Our audience is very much predominantly women who would be in that state of thinking they don't have time, when in actual fact, if they made that few minutes, it doesn't even have to be 10, it could be 1 minute of time, that third space to show up, like you said, a bit more present for their family and children.
Yeah, I mean, we can go in any direction you want, and we can certainly have the gender conversation because there are differences, definitely. So, where do you want to go?
Well,
what should we talk about first?
What was really powerful from that presentation you gave was the story around the guy coming home in his car, and then he created that entrance way to his house. Like I still think about it.
Yeah.
Like, and that, like even just sharing that story again. You've probably told it 5 trillion times, but.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is kind of the story that really started this whole concept. It was this and some conversations with special forces soldiers about transition. So, I was working with a group, and the CEO of the group, it was in Brisbane. So, I'm away from home, and, I just sit in a hotel room by myself when I travel. It's not an exciting life. And he kind of said, like, since you're on your own, come over and have dinner with the family. So I went over to this guy's house and I hung out with him and his family. And this guy was a rock star. Like, he was just so chilled and present and fun and funny. And I knew the day he'd had because I'd spent the day with him, and he was dealing with multiple disasters. And when he walked me out of the house, I just kind of went, man, like, how do you go from psycho businessman to super dad? And what he talked about is that he built a new entrance into his home. Now, we're going to talk about the practicality of that in a moment, but because he had quite a big house, and he used to park the car in the garage, and he built a door from the garage to his bedroom, and that's his entrance. And he said, like, I'm off limits. The family's not allowed to talk to me in that time. And I go into my room, I take off my suit, I have a shower, I put on casual clothes. He does this like little tiny mindfulness activity just to make him a bit calmer and present. And then he said, I walk out and I greet the family. And he said, that's the most important 15 minutes of my day, because I'm leaving the day behind and I'm showing up as this, the partner and the parent I want to be. So so that was one of the stories. And I just thought, oh man, that's like fascinating. And then, I spoke to other people about how they would transition, and there was this common theme. So that kind of sparked us studying it, particularly in the transition from work to home, because most people find that one the hardest.
Yeah.
I would love you to talk about female and male when you started on that before, because can you touch on that?
Yeah, look, there is differences for sure. And, what I've seen in my work over the last 25 years is I feel that men are better at looking after themselves. What they really suck at is they're not good at leaving the emotion of the day behind. Like, they often carry it. And it's really hard to determine causality on this, but I think it's just that men tend not to tap into their emotions as much. So the risk for males, and I know this is a generalization, is they'll have a bad day and they'll take it home and they'll take it out on the family. what we have found, and once again, it's a generalization, is with women, they tend to go home and their mind is, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And it's just like that. They've just changed jobs, really. Mm-hmm. So what we find is they come in a bit like the hurricane of, got to get all this done. What are you doing? Clean your room, this sort of real franticness. Mm-hmm. And that obviously doesn't have a good impact. The other thing too is that they're just carrying so much stress. So that, particularly for women, that even if it's a couple of minutes, that time to decompress, unwind, and just give themselves a moment to just kind of stop, slow down, and reset themselves. Mm. Now, obviously, when we talk about, here's a gender thing. I'll tell this story. I presented this in, I think I was in Perth, and a woman came up to me, and I could tell she was mad, like she was frustrated just by the way she was walking. She came up and she said, "This concept sounds like a man came up with it." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, I came up with it, so yeah." And she goes, "Well, I don't have a third space because I have to go home and I have to like do the washing, clean the house, cook dinner. And, there's no time for me to transition. I just changed jobs." And she was just really ranting. And I said, "All right, like when you go home, what emotional state would you say you're in?" And she's like, "I'm pissed off because I don't want to have to do all this work. And the people in my home aren't helpful." And like, she was just really angry. And I said, "I totally get your anger around the lack of, what's the word? Fairness around who's doing things in the home. And that's a conversation you got to have with the people you live with." But what I said is that's different to this concept. This concept is, how do I use that transition to enter the home in a better state? Whether that's a better state to talk to people in my family and encourage them to help me, or whether it's, have a hard conversation or put a boundary in place of going, "No, I'm not doing that. You're going to do it." The third space is like, what do I bring into the home, and how is that going to affect the people I live with? And I gave her an example because in my house, I do all food is my job, like the planning, the shopping, the cooking, the prep, the whole bit. So every night I cook dinner. Now I can walk in and go, far out, I don't want to cook dinner. I've been on my feet all day. I've been talking all day. Last thing I want to do is, but what I use that third space is to, how do I go in and make that a great experience? And how I do it is I usually, like, I get my daughters to help me, but the sort of, the way I con them into it is we play music while we're cooking dinner and they get to choose the music and we all sort of sing and carry on. Like, sorry, so much Taylor Swift at the moment. It's killing me. But like, so I can show up going, far out, don't want to do this. Or I can use that, hey, that's a really great opportunity to have a bit of fun, turn my brain off, not stress, be playful, and just kind of hang out with the kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much.
And that was a really big answer to your question.
No, it's good.
It's really good. One of our businesses is we obviously with doTERRA, as you know, because you've presented at their conference, and something that we teach the people that are doing face-to-face events, especially in-person events in someone else's home, is when they arrive at that person's home and they're sitting in their car and they haven't unpacked yet, is to take a moment to become present, realize why you're there at that person's home. What is your intention around hosting this event in that person's home? And this all has been, again, something that has kind of developed from what you taught us years ago. Because if someone walks into that home and they're like, I just need to sell oils, it's a so different thing to someone walking into that person's home to say, I'm here to help people use essential oils to empower their homes, or something like that. And so it's just having that conversation with yourself in the car before you walk into their home to make their life better. And it's nothing actually about my life or I'm selling oils, but I'm actually helping people. And that's that third space as well.
I love what you just said then. Yeah. Like, it's so true. It's about, how do I show up? What's my intent? What am I trying to achieve?
Yeah.
So, you think about the presentation this afternoon with police officers, and Tracy, I know you have a real intimate connection with that, but, before I go on stage, I always think, what impact do I want to have?
Mm.
And what I make the presentation is not about me, like, oh, I hope I don't get nervous or I hope I do a good job. It's like, what do I want them to walk out of the room with? How do I want them to feel?
Mm.
Yeah.
And, you know, like that job, I just look at that job and go, I don't know how anyone does that job. Like, that is such a hard gig. So, you know, my mindset is about how do I help people that do a really important but difficult job? So I will use that transition into walking on stage to get my head right for the game. And you're exactly right. If you're going into someone's home, what sort of impact do you want to have? You know, even your physicality, you know, your body language, that whole piece of just getting very clear of how am I going to show up for this thing? And that's, I think it was Duke University showed that 55% of our day we're on autopilot. Like, we just move from one thing to another, but we don't think about how we need to show up. And that's what this is about, that take that moment to go, you know, here's what I want to achieve. Here's the impact I want to have. So your example of going into you know, someone's home and talking about the products is a beautiful one.
Yeah. But like, I love what you said as well around just showing up to how to cook dinner with the family, or, you know, there's so many things, like our audience is very much mums. And there are so many examples that I could give. Like, my kids are much older, but how do we turn up to our family? Like, how do we show up to our family in the best place possible? And it's not, we're human and we're always going to make mistakes, and there are going to be disaster moments in our life where we're like, probably could have handled that better. But imagine if we went into that prior to handling that situation poorly, had that moment of like 30-second moment of like, how am I going to handle this in the best way possible? And it might still be a disaster, let's face it, because they're children, but it could also turn out so much better. Just acknowledging that there is a transition there. And some people don't even acknowledge that.
No, but they're not aware of it. And this is something you said before, Joanne, of like, you were sitting in that presentation going, yeah, like, of course. And when people hear this concept, they kind of go, oh, wow, like, I live that every day and I feel it, but I've never given language to it or never thought about it formally. And yeah, as I was saying, we tend to just blow from one thing to another. And we often bring the mood and mindset of what we've just done into what we're about to do. And sometimes that's the wrong mood and mindset. And even like, the thing I love about this idea is you can just take it and make it work for you no matter what your circumstance is. Or even like, when particularly with my daughters, when I am about to enter the home, this sounds really morbid, but I think, what if this was the last day I got to see them? And I also think about, it's so cliche, people talk about how fast it goes, but far out, it just flies by. And I just kind of go, how many more days do I have where I come in the door and they run to me? Because my 13-year-old doesn't do that anymore. My 10-year-old still does. She's like, Daddy, and runs down the hall. My 13-year-old's like, yeah, I don't care. So it's about, I almost use negative thinking to make me show up better, to kind of appreciate the situation I have.
That's such a good way to look at it. And you're so incredibly right. Like, mine are currently 20 or about to turn 23 this week, and 20. And it's just a blink and they're gone, like a blink in the eye. And they're luckily still very present in my life, but it's, it goes really fast. And so showing up in the best way possible for them so that they do have that connection with us.
And do you know, we talk about the gender thing. When I present, I often have men in their sort of 50s come up to me and go, I wish I'd seen that 20 years ago. And they go, man, I'm proud of my success and I'm proud of how hard I worked. But the most common line is they say, the people that meant the most to me got the worst version of me. You know, I come in the door, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm yelling at my kids about their room or whether they've done their homework. And they just go, God, if I had it over again, that's one thing I'd change. And that's what this is about. Whether you live on your own, like if you live on your own, your ability to transition home, disconnect, socialize, relax and unwind. You talked about working from home. we did heaps of research on this concept during COVID lockdowns. People that lived on their own almost worked themselves to death because they were like, well, there's no one else in the house. I might as well just keep doing work. And, you know, so if you live on your own, your ability to turn off at the end of the day is a really important thing. Because if you've got children, you're kind of forced to in a way. So yeah, this is a concept that just applies to everyone, every context. Yeah.
Have you done any research on how many times the average person transitions in a day?
Oh, we have to a degree. It's just very, very hard to measure.
Yeah.
So
it'd be hundreds though, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Thousands.
Hundreds. And even, you know, going from one email to another is almost a transition.
Oh, true.
And I think, Tracy, you said something before that made me think of this. Even when we're at work, you know, how do we show up for a meeting? And one thing, we were doing some research with lawyers looking at their transitions. And the problem is that most of their day is, how do I pick the errors in this or the risk in this? So they have a very pessimistic mindset. And what we found is that when they were going into meetings that were much more about innovation and planning and ideas, they would bring that mentality of that won't work, can't do that, and just shoot everything down. So I said, the problem is you've got to help them transition into that in a different way and getting them to. And so what we actually did is some like crazy improv exercises so people who are about to go out on stage and do improv, what they do is a series of exercises just to expand their mind. And we got them to do that. And the results were staggering.
Yeah.
So
wow.
yeah, it applies
it
to
is
so
true.
much.
It does actually, because my husband, when he was first a policeman, like when he first became a policeman 17 odd years ago, everyone was a criminal. Like he'd look at everyone as a criminal. I'm like, babe, not every like.
Yeah.
But like, oh, you know, and it was that, again, that negativity was sort of there because that's who he was dealing with every single day, like literally pretty much the scum of the earth, right? Every single day.
Yeah.
So wherever we went, everyone was a criminal. And I'm like, you know, and I had to kind of coax him out of it a little bit and kind of make him see that that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I remember that actually, Tracy. Like, oh, I can't go to that restaurant. Oh, I can't go to that restaurant because such and such eats
we'd be in
there.
the shopping, like Woolworths, and he'd be like, oh, that guy's been arrested for something. That guy's been arrested for something. Oh my God, I don't even want to know. Like, I don't even want to know who I'm walking around the supermarket with. Yes, that guy murdered someone. Awesome. Great. Thanks for telling me that. But it's true. Like what you said, though, that mentality was there and he had to really work really hard to not dive into that deeper, because you could end up really negative if you're in a space where you're dealing with really negative people all the time. Like,
we do it to ourselves though, don't we? Like my kids are 10 and 13 as well. So I'm living your life. And I find I get into the negative Nelly at times as well, dealing with a teenager, dealing with a 10-year-old, dealing with all the things. And then you start like going, oh, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. Blah, 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 blah. It'd be nice if she just smiled and said goodbye to me at the drop-off zone. My 10-year-old,
way too much.
my 10-year-old, he's still I was only having this conversation. I rang my husband on the way home from school and we were only having this conversation this morning. And I'm like, oh, Jake, he still's like blows me kisses from the footpath walking up to his classroom. And Eva's like, have a good day.
Oh my God, we are living each other's life. Those examples, they're just really elegant examples of, you think about your husband, it's that almost that lack of awareness. And you can I have like so much empathy for, of course you would feel like that because your whole day is, this person did this, and they get to see how dangerous people can be. But what I love is that, both of you had the self-awareness to go, oh man, this is my predominant mindset that I bring to each interaction. And that self-awareness to go, hey, when I'm transitioning into this, whether it's a barbecue with friends, I've got to change that mentality, or whether it's, spending time with the children. So yeah, it's a beautiful example of the third space can help us with self-awareness. Like, how am I showing up? what sort of impact am I having? I came to work the other day and I just in a bad mood because a few things had gone wrong, and we had a team meeting and someone in my team made a mistake, and I brought it up and talked about it. And I was a little bit curt, and I brought it up 4 more times in the meeting. And afterwards, my business manager just pulled me aside and goes, "Hey, in that meeting, you're a real dick and you've got to apologize to her." And when someone nails you between the eyes and you can't argue, and I just went, "Oh, you're so right." Went downstairs straight away, apologized, just said, "There's no excuse for it. I was out of line. I had a bad day. I'm taking it out on you. Yeah, I'm really sorry. Yeah, I hope you forgive me." But that's what this thing's about, is that, as you were saying, you never get it perfect. Like, because I've worked on this for so long, I've gotten good at it, but you're never perfect. And, I shouldn't have entered that meeting in the mentality that I had, because I was not helpful. I was not constructive. And even the other day, I did my third space on the way home. I'd had a really bad day and I walked in, I was kind of taking it out on people, and my wife went, "Hey, you got to go for a walk, all right? Because this ain't going to fly." So I took the dog and went for a walk and came back better.
Do you find that, so we've talked a lot about like we've had a bad day and we're bringing that home, but what if we've had a fantastic day and we're bringing that home as well, and our energy is great, but is there like, what if the person that we're coming home to has had a really bad day and we're like, "I've had the best day ever," and they're like had a really bad day, and you're like, "Yeah, but I've had the best day." Like, is there a third space there that we should be mindful of as well? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, that's such a great question. Such a great question. Look, if you live with another person and you're listening to this, talk to them about this concept. Because, once I was presenting and a couple came up to me and she was kind of shoving him in the back towards me. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great. And he came up and said, "Oh, we'd like to have a conversation because, we have a difficult situation." And then she cut over and said, "Here's the deal. This guy, he's my manager. Like, my husband is my manager." And, and I said, "Oh God." And I said, "So how's the transition home?" And basically the transition home is she tells him how much he's of an arsehole he's been all day. "Here's how you weren't fair on me. Here's how you gave this other person preferential." And they tend to fight the whole way home. And what we started to talk about was, having boundaries in place where each of them got 5 minutes to vent about the day. And they actually kept in contact and would send me emails. And what they decided is when they went through this certain roundabout, it's like, okay, we're husband and wife now. And it's like, okay, we're going to talk about, the kids or the fun stuff. And what they've got to the point is they don't even need the 5-minute vent anymore at each other. And unless it's like, "Hey, this big thing happened today and I wasn't happy about it." But now the conversation is much more, we get in the car, we're husband and wife, we use that transition home to decompress. So it's, gosh, how did we get onto that? Was that something you asked Joanne about? Oh, no, Tracy, you made a comment about, what was it? Sorry.
Like if we're really enthusiastic because we've
right.
had a great day and they've had like a really shitty day.
Cool. Okay. So what you've got to be mindful of is, and empathetic of, is that, if your partner's had a bad day and you've had a great one, you don't want to go in and kind of rub it in their face. What you want to do is go in with that mentality of support. And then later on, once they've kind of got over themselves, then you can celebrate the victory of, "Hey, this great thing happened that day." And this happened a couple of months ago, right? Like, I had the best day ever and I got all this awesome news. And I'm working on this thing and I'm super excited. And my phone rings and it's my wife. And it was about 5:30. And the first line she said is, "You have to come home and sort out your children." And it's your children. And I've just gone, oh crap, the kids have been hideous. And I'm like, cool. And I just packed up my stuff, came home. And the whole way home, I'm thinking, like, just have empathy for her, because she works full time as well. And, I travel, so she has to cover that. And I'm thinking, like, how do I help her? How do I give her a break? And so I just walked in with that mentality of, "Hey, I'm so sorry you've had a really tough day." And I parked my thing and I just went in and just talked to her and validated her, how she was feeling and what was going on for her. And I ended up taking the girls out just to give her some time on her own. But rather than, and it's, once again, it's, you don't want to show up and go, oh, great, you're in a bad mood and I've had an awesome day and now you're killing my vibe. It's much more about, hey, we're partners in this thing, and it ebbs and flows. And then later on that night, over a glass of wine, I said, hey, this awesome thing happened and we had this really cool interaction. But she just needed that time, that they would just, you know, kids can be full on. They were in her face. She'd had a tough day and she was just at the breaking point. So yeah, that's where I had to step in.
Oh, well, the third space has definitely changed my life. And I know it has changed Tracy's as well. And yeah, I just love it. It honestly, it's an absolute game changer. Like, as I said, even just yesterday, going from emails, your to-do list basically is your emails, and to another project where I needed to use my brain a lot, to just have that moment to go and make a cuppa and switch off from one project to the next one is an absolute game changer. So you've got a book. You also have a course as well. So if you want to talk about them, that would be great.
Yeah, so we've got a book called The Third Space, which obviously goes into this concept in much more detail. Talks not only about the transition from work to home, but all our transitions, as we've discussed here today. You know, it comes up with specific examples. Yeah, so that's the book. We also have a 12-week course that's about, it's an online course around, well, how do I transition home? And what it gives in that course is just lots of tools and strategies. It's, you know, so once I'm in the home, you know, what are some things I can do to build better connection? How do I, you know, if I've had a really bad day, how do I leave that behind? So yeah, if you want to know more about this concept, there's 2 resources, the online Third Space program and the book.
Yeah. And what's your program, Flow?
Yeah, Flow's much more about the research we did into high performance, particularly when I was with athletes. So Flow is this state where we're so absorbed in what we're doing, it's almost like time vanishes. And it's a state usually where challenge is high, but we just bring all our skills to the table. So for example, you know, like a party that you do could be Flow. You know, you're communicating really well. People are really engaged. You're sharing great information. A presentation could be Flow. Like even doing a task, writing a report. It's just where you get lost in an experience. So Flow's all about like, how do we tap into that high performance state?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because there is a lot of stress in a lot of people's lives. So all of that would resonate. Like the third space needs to resonate, because stress, you know, like we've talked about a lot. Stressful days, hard days, horrible days, they're all stress on our body and mind. And then to have that little bit of time to just be like, let's just take a moment. Let's just show up in a different way. Let's change our mindset slightly. And it just has to be micro changes as well sometimes. Like we don't have to figure out war and peace or, you know, change climate or I don't know, whatever, right? Cure cancer. But it's just like, let's just make some little micro changes to our mindset, because all of those make a huge difference over the course of a day.
Yeah. And even I was talking to an executive and he said, what I've taken away is every time I enter a room, I pause, I take a deep breath, and I just ask myself, how do I want to show up? Whether I'm going into a client, whether I'm about to meet a staff member and we've got to have a performance conversation. I mean, I've got letters from doctors as well who said, you know, I heard about this concept and I use it as I transition into a patient. And I picture, what if my mum was there? How would I want a doctor to show up for her? And what he says is, it just helps me reset, but have a mentality of service and connection rather than, oh God, 30 more patients I've got to get through today. And I've got to get back on time. Yeah. He just talks about the benefit of it.
And you can picture it in imagine like your hairdresser not showing up for you, or your, you know, like every person that you almost interact with, like you want to have a great interaction with. And,
totally.
You know, if everyone had this concept in their mind, like even the lady putting my groceries through, like I want to have a good interaction at that place. And she wants to have a good interaction with her customer, you would imagine. And like everyone, imagine, like you said, like everyone shows up in this way. switching between transitions, it would be, gosh, the world would be a bit better place.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Well, thank you so very much. I know you're a very busy man, and like I said again off air, we kind of hounded your assistant to get you on our show.
Yeah, you must have broke her will. Yeah.
No, she was awesome. Actually, she was really lovely. So thank you so much again, Adam, and we'll put all the links to everything, all your programs and your book especially, on our show notes and everything. So thanks again for turning up today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.